Hi, welcome to my channel. My name's Chance, and today I'm going to be doing something a bit new. This is going to be my first hot takes video. So, board game review videos, they can take a while to make. I gotta play the game multiple times, I need to film video, I need to take shots of the game, then I gotta do all my editing. So they are a bit time consuming, which means that I don't get to really do a deep dive review for all the games that I get to play. That's what this series is going to be about. This is going to be trying to talk about and give my opinions on kind of my initial plays of some of the games that have been hitting my table. So I got a lot of catch up to do on this series because I got a lot of games that I've only played once in the past that I do have opinions on. And I do find that these hot takes are valuable. Like one of my favorite podcasts is Board Game Hot Takes. I'll leave a link to that one down below. I think that hearing why a game grabs someone's attention is incredibly valuable to me. Because those games that kind of stand out on that first play, those are the games that are easier to get back to the table. But there are some games that it's kind of like, well, maybe I didn't fully grasp this one on the first play and I want to return to it, but it's a little harder to table. So maybe it's going to be a while before I can actually get a review out because it's one of those games that's a little bit harder to table, harder to understand, harder to teach. And then finally, there's some games that it's just like, they don't grab my attention. They're probably not gonna return back to the table, which means that I'll never get a full review of them, but it's still valuable to understand, like, why do I not wanna return to this game? So that's what this series is going to be about, and I'm going to attempt to get hot takes videos about. I think my goal is on Fridays. I'll still aim for at least one deeper dive review video every week, and then of course I'm going to continue my table talk series. Ideally get one or two of those out a month, but those are my more time-consuming videos to make. So with that being said, let's kick off this new hot take series, and I'm going to start things off with the Eric Lang trilogy. So Blood Rage is already one of my favorite games. It's in my top 10. It's gonna stay there for quite a long time. I absolutely love it because of the kind of the chaos, but also just the ease of teaching and the ease of play and how quick players can kind of get into it and kind of form their strategies and be competitive in the game. I think that's a really strong advantage of Blood Rage, is where I can easily bring it out with new players, and it's an area control game that doesn't feel as aggressive as it looks because sometimes players want to lose, sometimes players want to win. There's variable scoring paths. So I think Eric Lang did a fantastic job with Blood Rage, and that made me very interested in trying out his other games in his area control trilogy. Those other two games are Ankh and Rising Sun. And I finally managed to get these two played in about the last 6 weeks or so. A friend owned Rising Sun, he brought that to the table and taught that, and we played that at 5 players, and then Ankh I recently acquired and also got that to the table, and we also played that one at 5 players. And I'm gonna start things off with Ankh. Now, the Ankh is something that I 100% want to revisit. I had a really good time with my first play of this game. It took a while for that first play, but we were playing at the max player count, and the teach I felt went pretty well. It was I learned the game probably an hour before game night, so I was a little worried about the teach, but I think the game is actually pretty straightforward with how it plays. Like the actions are all very easy to explain, and I felt like it actually was a easy game to kind of understand and teach. The thing that was a little harder to understand was how to score points. This was something while I was reading the rule book, I was like, where do points come from? Like I was struggling to understand, like, how do I score points in this game? I was like, okay, combat happens, but then how do I get points? And this is one of the disadvantages of the game. It's not as straightforward as Blood Rage. Like the point system is not as easy to grasp in your first play. I'm not gonna say it's super complicated, because once I understood it, it was like, oh, okay, like this is fine. It was just kind of until that first combat process, and maybe even until that second or third combat process, it took a little while for that to kind of sink in for me to actually do some planning. So that's where another play of this game would really benefit it. But the overall highlights of this game are going to be the action selection system. It had this really cool action selection board where every player was using the same board for action selection, and then each action had a token on it which acted as a timer. And then essentially when that token for a certain action reached the end of that board, it would trigger an event, and then it would go back to the beginning of that track. So it was this action selection system where players were controlling the pace of the game. And then it had a rule where you could take 2 actions in your turn, but the second action had to be below the first action you chose. So that forced you to kind of plan out the ordering of your actions in specific ways. And then there was that pacing mechanic where maybe you didn't want to take a certain action because you don't want to set someone up to trigger that event, because usually triggering that event is beneficial for a player. So they usually want to trigger that event. So maybe you're like, oh, I want to do that action, but if I do that action, it moves that timer 1 space closer, and that gives them that opportunity to trigger that event. So maybe I'm going to hold off on that one and move this other one up the track. So I thought that action selection system, this was probably the most interesting part of the game, and it was really cool how it turned your choice of action into an interaction in itself. Usually a lot of area control games, it's like the interaction is, okay, how do you deploy troops? Or where do you deploy troops, I should say. But in Ankh, it said, okay, the area control part, super interactive, but also which action you're even doing, I also made it interactive. So I think that was a really cool mechanic in this one. The next thing that stood out was the actual combat in the game. So combat was handled through, well, the number of troops you have in an area, but everyone also had a hand of identical cards. And it had a Concordia style hand management system to it. So if you're in combat in a region, everyone plays a card simultaneously face down, then reveal it, then process that card. But that card stays in a face up discard pile. And the only way to return cards back to your hand is by playing this like reset card that allows you to take all your discarded cards back to your hand. So as you played rounds of combat, people would kind of see your discard and they would know what options you had available to you in those future rounds. So they could kind of plan out what cards they played according to what was in your discard. So I found this to be a really interactive way to do combat, a really engaging way to do combat. And then also those cards, they brought out some variable scoring mechanics. Maybe you wanted to have troops in the desert to improve your scoring, or maybe you wanted to have troops on the fertile land to change your scoring. So kind of like Blood Rage, it gave you a few different paths to score those victory points, which I think is really valuable in an area control game where it's not just like, oh, whoever wins the region wins the game. It's like whoever has the best strategy in the game wins. Now, there are a couple things that I had some kind of reservations about. The first one was the fact that this is an area control game, and it was a little hard to parse out the state of the board because everyone had these god powers, which changed like their troop powers in certain ways or under certain conditions, or change the power of their god, but there's no way to kind of visualize that on the board. You kind of had to ask players. You had to be like, oh, how much power do you have in this region, and how much power do you have in this region? Because that would change your plans for the region you go to. And I think that's definitely a downside, because if you can't quickly parse out like what areas are under whose control, it definitely bogs the game down a bit. Which is why I think at 5 players it took a long time, because you couldn't, it was hard to remember who unlocked which powers. Even though you all had the same powers, it was just hard to remember who had what and how much power each person's troop was. So that one's more of a minor quibble, though I think it would get better as I play more. And the next thing that was the next 2 things that were slight negatives was there's this camel caravan event. Now this was a pro and a con because putting out this camel caravan was one of the coolest things in the game. I love these little camel miniatures that they had, but essentially when someone triggered the camel event, they got to basically split a region in 2. So the camel caravan would become a new border on the map, and it would split that region. It would change and then the player could change the ordering of the combat. Remember, you have that hand management system, so the order that the regions process is probably going to change how you play your cards during that hand management combat phase. So I thought that being able to control that ordering and being able to split that region, really cool, but placing those camels was probably the most analysis paralysis prone part of the game. So whoever triggered that might take a little while, and everyone else just kind of sitting and waiting for them to make their decision. So that's another thing that slowed down the game a bit. Although I found it really cool, it was just analysis paralysis prone. The very last thing is that merge mechanic. This was I would say a bit of a miss on the first play for this game. The player in last was not having a great time. They didn't feel like they were doing much in the game, and the player second to last, I think they felt bad that they were part of the merge. So the way the game works, at a certain point, the 2 losing players will become one god, but they don't both combine all their things. They combine some things, but the player in last loses a lot, and then that second to last player becomes kind of like, I would say, the primary god. and then they both only get one action per turn. And it kind of, we realize that it kind of breaks the action rules because of how they can order their actions. So it has a slight benefit, but not like a huge advantage. So it is still going to be hard for that person to catch up. I'd be interested to see how it plays out more. And now that people understand the merge, it would be interesting to bring the table back, or the game back out with that merge mechanic. But overall, so even with those quibbles of the game, I think that there were some standout mechanics in this one that makes me really excited to bring this game back out. And with that said, this brings me on to Rising Sun. So Rising Sun was one I definitely struggled with more. I did not have as good of a first play. I was the one that was in last, well, I think I was last or second to last most of the game. I was down around like 0 points until the end game scoring, but this one was just harder to grasp right out of the gate. It was the hardest of the three to kind of understand on that first play. First up, the faction asymmetries felt a little stronger than in Ankh, so it's kind of like Blood Rage. There's no faction asymmetries. Then in Ankh, there's a light faction asymmetries, and then in Rising Sun, I felt like there were significant faction asymmetries. So right there, because of those asymmetries, it was more challenging to just grasp what everyone could do in the game. And then second were these cards that came out. So basically you had a bit of a tableau building mechanic going on where you could gain control of these monsters, but also you could change up what scoring opportunities might be available to you with these tableau cards. But the problem was that with the first play, you didn't really know what was coming up. Like you didn't know what was in the deck, you didn't know what was going to be available to you. So there was really no good way to strategize off of a first play of this game. And that means this game really needs another play, because now I have a better idea of what might be available to me in that next play. Then finally, the most interesting part of this was that combat phase again. Like Eric Lang does some really interesting combat systems. And this one had a bidding system. So like everyone has this like board where it has, I think, 5 actions or so. And during the combat phase, you would take your coins, that's kind of like the main resource you're collecting in the game, and put your bids on those various sections of your board for the combat. And then those sections of the board are actions, and then whoever wins the bid of that action basically gets to take that action. This was kind of strange because there was like one of the actions was, seppuku, or the suicide. You basically get to suicide your troops to gain victory points, or sacrifice themselves or whatever. But it was kind of weird that someone could outbid you on the suicide, the seppuku action. So it's like they outbid you and now you can't do it anymore. It's like, the gods don't favor that anymore, so you can't take that action. And this created a auction system where I don't know, I struggle with these blind auctions, and they really give me some, I don't know, they give me some weird anxiety and some weird AP going on. It's not the most exciting or engaging system for me for combat. It was unique, but it was one that, yeah, it just doesn't land on me in the way that I think it does for some other people. Because it does bring up some of that anxiety with like, oh, that, like, am I bidding too much? Am I bidding too little? And it's not the joyful bidding. It's because it's kind of like if you bid wrong, like you're screwed. I would enjoy playing something like Modern Art where the bidding is a bit looser and a bit crazy. Whereas in Rising Sun, it's like if you're off by 1, wow, your game can be at a huge disadvantage now. So while it was interesting, it was also stressful. So yeah, that was my play of Rising Sun. Now, while I'm not as positive on Rising Sun as I was on Ankh, I still want to play this one again. I do want to get it back to the table. I feel like it had some very unique things going for it, and it was just hard to grasp on one play. So I don't feel like I'm giving it what it deserves with that first play. But yeah, due to that complexity, it's not going to be for everyone, because since it is kind of hard to, like, you just kind of have to accept that your first play is probably going to be a bit garbage. So those are my thoughts on Ankh and Rising Sun. Want to revisit both of them, but Ankh was kind of the stronger contender from my point of view. I will mention that one of my friends, that he did poorly in Ankh, so he didn't have the best time in that one. He enjoyed Rising Sun more. So there is definitely some differences in opinion on those two games. Okay, let's move on to something a little bit lighter, but still area control, and that's gonna be Perch. So Perch is a game that I bought on a whim. It was one of those games where I was trying to get free shipping from where I was purchasing games from, and I was like, this one puts me over that threshold, so I'll throw it in my cart. That's how I get some of these interesting games that I know nothing about before I buy them. Perch, I had a fantastic time with. I am super excited to get back to this game. It is fantastic. It's really enjoyable, very entertaining. Decent production, some production issues with the game, like the acrylic pieces kind of don't, I don't know, the stickers on them didn't really lay flat, so there's some bubbles in the acrylic or whatever, and there's some imperfections, I would say, in the production, but nothing that really detracts from the game too much. I think overall, really nice looking game and a really fun to play. So Perch is a area control game where you're going to place out a number of like tiles, which are the areas on the game board, and then for every round, players are going to take 2 of their own birds, but then there's also this migration bag that players are going to be adding the birds to, and then they're going to draw 2 birds from the migration bag, which means that could be any player's birds. So you're guaranteed to have 2 of your own birds during a round, and then 2 of just random birds, maybe your own, maybe someone else's birds. And then a turn is you just placing a bird out on one of those areas. And I think this is really cool where you're guaranteed placing out 2 of your birds, but then you're also just placing out someone else's birds. And this game is built around ties. So ties are the meanest possible system where whoever ties, they just cancel out that scoring position. So like if players tie for first and second in a region, first and second, or if they tie for first, that means the first and second scorers they're just not going to score. The only person that gets points from that region is going to be the person in third. So having control of where to place someone's birds, you're usually trying to get someone to tie in a region or get the opponents to tie in a region just to cancel each other out entirely. And then some of those tiles have abilities on them. So having the majority allows you to trigger that ability on those tiles or take control of an animal in the game, which those animals give you a free action. So being in that majority position can give you a benefit. But if there's a tie on that tile for that first place, no one gets that benefit. So like I said, the game is really focused around those ties. And the scoring on these tiles is super unique. It's kind of like maybe one tile scores 7 points for first place, 3 points for second place, and 5 points for third place. Or a tile scores 0 points for first place, 1 point for second place, and 5 points for third place. So the scoring is kind of all over the place with these tiles, but usually it lines up with whatever ability it has. Maybe that tile that scores 0 for first place has an ability that's really good, so you still want to get the majority in there. So they're balanced in kind of a unique way. And then also these animals that come out during the game, if you gain control of it, like there's a dog in there, which if you have control of the dog on your turn as a free action, you can move the dog to a tile and it barks and you can scare away a bird and scare it into another region of the board. So there's just a lot of, it's very loony, I would say. It's very chaotic, very entertaining game. It was a light-hearted area control game. Like everyone that was playing it was kind of laughing around the table. And the end game scoring ended up being very surprising. The person that seemed like they were doing the worst ended up taking the victory. So I had a really good time playing Perch, and I see this one staying in my collection, and I'm really excited to bring this one back to the table. Okay, so next up, let's move on to a Euro style game. This is gonna be Black Forest. So right out of the gate, I gotta say that this one just didn't grab me at all. There's nothing bad about this game or nothing broken. It was just, this is not my style of game. So Black Forest is a worker placement game where there is going to be some randomization of setup, but there's also these building tiles out there that there's going to be some advanced modes where you can kind of change which buildings are available in some way. But it is a game that is kind of, once it's set up, you can basically plan your strategy from turn 0. You can look at all the buildings available, look at the main scoring buildings, like there's these large buildings that are going to be some big scoring points if you achieve the conditions on them. Kind of like any other Euro, you're kind of building towards getting to those, you're like building up your resource engine to get to those big scoring tiles. So pretty standard Euro fare. but it was a game where it put out everything for you at the start of the game. So you could be from turn 0, you could say, okay, I'm gonna go for this building, this building, this building, and try to get this main scoring building. Like, you could just plan that out as your path. And then your biggest risk is someone going for that same big building, and that could be detrimental to you because then it's basically a race to get to that big building. But if there's no competition for that building, it's kind of like you're kind of playing your own game. Like, there's not a whole lot of interaction in this one. It has kind of the Euro interaction, but even though, like, it's a worker placement game, and I really like worker placement games, but I like them when they are tight, and I like it when those turn orders matter, like in viticulture, like when I need to get to a space before someone else, and that turn order is critical to be able to kind of get to block someone out of doing something or to prevent myself from being blocked out of doing something. Black Forest just felt too loose. I didn't feel like players were getting in my way. Like, we played it at the full player count of 4, and I never felt like anyone was really in my way. Like, every now and again, someone would go to the exact spot I'd want to go to, but essentially the spots were set up where you would activate the 2 villagers on both sides of your worker placement spot. And then there was also this traveling merchant that you could use to kind of like reconfigure the board in a way. So because of that freedom, you were never totally blocked out of what you may need to do during the game. So this one, for me, it just didn't provide the tension that I enjoy in worker placement games. Then also it's a farm game, so no, that doesn't do it for me. Like I never got into Agricola. It's just this theme that I don't know, like I'm more into fantasy, sci-fi and stuff. The farming theme just doesn't really do it for me. Even though this game is about glass production, you're still like getting animals and putting them in pens and building and, I don't know, cutting down forests and stuff. So it didn't really have that theme of glass making, even though that was the main ingredient required to get the buildings. I don't know, the theme didn't land for me. It felt kind of, it was resource management, right? Like, the theme didn't really matter. You're just managing these resources. Now, before I talk about the one thing I liked, I want to mention one more flaw in the game, because I mentioned that you can kind of plan it out from turn 0 and you're just like, okay, I'm set for this game. But there was one random element where at a certain point, people would flip over this tile, which would be like this new little village that popped up with kind of like an order delivery mechanic. Like, if you had the right resources, you could go there, deliver them, and then you get some kind of like windfall of other resources. But this was a really weird thing, because what happened during my game was essentially that tile would flip over, and then 1 or 2 people at the table would be like, oh, I can do that one. So there was really no incentive to try to achieve that tile, because it's just kind of like it would flip over. Then if you could do it, you would go and do it. If you couldn't, you'd be like, okay, well, I'm not getting that. That's going to someone else. It was this thing where like, you had this very strategic turn 0 planning game, and then you had this one random piece that would flip over, and it would just be a windfall for somebody at the table. They still had to take a turn to do that thing, so maybe it didn't fully line up with what they needed, but usually it was more advantageous than not for them to go and take that action. So I don't know, that was a weird thing that stood out to me in the game. Now, lastly, I will call it a thing that I did like about this, and that was the resource management. Like, you had this player board with these 2 little clock hands, and like, once your resources moved past the bottom clock hand, like, you would rotate it, and that would be how you produce like glass or provisions. And I thought this was a really cool puzzle, like managing those resources. And sometimes maybe you didn't want that resource to move, because essentially if your resource moves and that bottom space is open on that clock hand, you have to produce glass. Like, it just automatically happens. Like, your workers are like, hey, we have everything, we're gonna produce glass now. No choices. I thought that was a really cool way to do resource management. I'd actually like to see that used in some other games. That was the interesting part of the puzzle for me. So that did stand out for me. But like, this is, I don't think I would ever choose this over some of my other favorite worker placement games like Viticulture or even Everdale, which I feel like is a little bit lighter, but it just has fantastic art. I really like looking at it. I like looking at my tableau during that. So, or Cryo, Manhattan Project, Energy Empire. Like, there's so many fantastic worker placement games out there. Black Forest just didn't really elevate itself into a space that makes me want to return to it. Now, I'm not going to say, like, if I have a friend that wants to play it, I'll join the game with them. Like, I'm not against playing Black Forest. It just, yeah, it didn't grab me. Last one I want to talk about, ending this on a high note, this is going to be Eternal Decks. So this is a co-op hand management game, and the goal of the game is to basically stay alive. Everyone needs to maintain a hand of cards to be able to play. Essentially, if a player cannot play a card on their turn, everyone loses. And you can actually run out of cards because everyone starts with, I think, 5 cards. And essentially the game's called Eternal Decks because you're trying to collect other decks from the board. Like there's gonna be 9 other decks put out on the board, and you have to manage when players trigger the action that allows them to take a deck. And you wanna make sure that the player with the least amount of cards is kind of gaining new decks to kind of stay alive in that round. And overall, this is just a fantastic puzzle. It reminds me a little bit of Regicide because in Regicide, I'm gonna do a review on that one because I played a ton of Regicide, absolutely love it. But you have this hand of cards and you have to determine like when does it make sense to draw cards. Like if you ever run out of cards, you lose. So kind of like same with Eternal Decks, you wanna make sure players have cards in their hand to play. But Eternal Decks makes it a little more puzzly. Like it adds a new layer to kind of this mechanic, this hand management co-op game. And I just found it absolutely fascinating. Like you're playing cards out in these rows have different rules associated with them. Like in the basic, or the first level or whatever, it's the top row is gonna be ascending cards, the next row is descending cards, and then you have rules where you can't place the same number next to each other and you can't place the same color next to each other. So, and then the decks that you're gaining, like you get to see what cards are gonna be in that deck that you gain. So you can see like what color and what numbers you're gonna have. So maybe you wanna get colors that other players don't have so you're not kind of locked into not playing, or you want to make sure you can play different colors next to each other. And then also when you unlock one of those decks, you awaken an Eternal, and that Eternal goes up top and their curse becomes active. So maybe it says that you can't play 6s anymore. So until you get rid of that curse, like you can negate that curse in a certain way. So it creates this really interesting puzzle of playing these cards, and it has a couple ways you can lose the game. So you're trying to avoid those loss conditions while trying to move towards those victory conditions. And the game has different stages which are going to change up those victory conditions. So there's a lot of variability in this, and I'm overall really excited to return to this one. Portland Games Collective, I believe, picked this up for a reprint in I think the fall, like August timeframe. My goal is to get the game played a few more times so I can get a full review out of this, so you guys can hopefully make a decision on if this game is worth checking out for you. But this is the standout of my hot takes review, is Eternal Decks. I cannot wait to get this one back to the table. So that's gonna do it for my first hot takes video. I hope you guys found this valuable. Let me know your thoughts on this. If you found this useful, then yeah, I definitely want to continue this. Like I said, my goal is gonna be on Fridays for these hot takes videos. Then just to recap this, so Black Forest was the only one, this one, that I don't have a strong interest in returning to. Perch and Eternal Decks are the two kind of standouts for me. Like I loved Perch, I really want to return to it. Eternal Decks has a lot of variability and I cannot wait to get that back to the table. Ankh was one I had some misgivings about, but I really enjoyed some aspects of the game, so I can't wait to play that one again either. Then Rising Sun was the only one that I have a lot of misgivings about, and I don't think I fully understand it, so I think it needs another play or two for me to have a strong opinion on the game. So yeah, that's the summary. Those are my final thoughts here. And as usual, thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys spending your time with me. And of course, please like and subscribe.